Hello, my name is Teresa and this is week 5 of my 100 days of making comics. This week I have been designing my settings and I have finished that, so I'll be discussing set design for comics, and in the background you can see me doing what I'm talking about. I hope you enjoy it. I'm going to be dividing what I want to say in two main parts. Part 1 would be knowing what you want from your sets, and part 2 is getting what you want from your sets, which are two very different things. So let's start with knowing what you want. When you're preparing the visual component of a comic, be it the characters, the settings, the lettering, whatever you're creating that is going to be a graphic element in the comic, needs to, in my opinion, contribute to the story. And so your sets are going to be part of the story, and you need to understand in which way your set design affects the reader or affects the way the story is perceived. So I think about two things. I think about the level of detail that I want to include, and I think about the level of realism that I want to portray. Let's go first into the level of realism. Now, if you have read Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud, you will be familiar with this concept of symbolic representation and realistic images. I'm paraphrasing, but basically what Scott McCloud says is that in comics you can have very iconic things such as a smiley face, and those iconic things become very universal. It could be any person if it's just two dots and a smiley mouth in a circle, right? That could be any person in the world. It's not male or female, it's not anything, it's just so symbolic that it represents every single person. It's just a person smiling. Now, how does this affect our set design? Well, when you make your settings very symbolic, like you create a room that is basically a square with a bed and a table, that could be anyone's bedroom. And in that sense, if you're trying to make a story that is more universal, that is just not trying to make a point about a specific person or a specific room, then that would probably work. However, if your aim is to create a story that talks about a specific person's story in a specific setting, and you want just to underline the fact that this is a unique person and a unique story, not a hashtag relatable type thing, then you want to be putting a little bit more realism. And what I mean by realism is that if you're drawing a table that is a rectangle and 4 legs, that is the symbol of a table, that is any table. But if you make your table to be a Rococo style 19th century replica in a modern flat, that is making a point about the type of person that lives in that house. That is a very specific piece of furniture, and if you were to walk into that house, that piece of furniture would give more character to whoever lives in that house. What I'm trying to say here, in simpler terms, is that simplistic, symbolic rooms, landscapes, and objects will take your reader to make simplistic, general assumptions about the world you've created. This could be a positive thing. This could be an excellent thing, because maybe you want any reader in the world to feel that they can connect with that setting you've created. On the other hand, if you're trying to create a story that transports the reader into a specific world, maybe a magical world or something like that, then you want to be a bit less symbolic and go more into the specific and the concrete. So for example, for my story, I went into Pinterest and I was looking for very specific type of furniture and settings. I was thinking about a castle, a medieval European castle, and I was thinking about a specific style that is called estilo castellano, that is typical of my area of Spain, because it's like very thick wooden pieces of furniture with metal details. Like it's very, it's very strong, very sturdy, and that's what I had in mind when I was thinking about this school of witchcraft. And that's exactly what I'm looking for, because that is what I want to take the reader to. That's what I want the reader to perceive. I don't want them to think that this school could be anywhere or that the building could be any building. I want to convey that idea of medieval European Spanish castle. That's basically what I'm going for. And that's why I have to go into a little bit more trouble to portray that. So I have to look at reference and but anyway, we'll get into that when we go into the second question, which is getting what you want. So how do you know? How do you know what you want? How do you know how symbolic or how specific you want to make your settings? Well, I tend to think about it this way. If my story is a story that wants to transport the reader into a world that I think is interesting and I want that reader to experience that world, I need to make it as specific and as realistic as possible. Now, on the other hand, if what I want is the reader to assume that this is anything that they consider normal, then I would make the setting more symbolic. So what it comes down to is, do you want your reader to be awed or to be taken and transported to a magical world and have that sense of sensory stimulation? Or do you want your reader to feel connected to this setting in an automatic way, as in they are filling in the blanks? If this is a blank table, it could be their table. If this is a blank face, this could be their face. So you're moving between those two extremes of identification and taking the reader somewhere. And this is a spectrum, of course. If you create completely realistic settings, you're just showing the reader the location that this story takes place in, and you're transporting them visually to that setting. And on the other side of the spectrum is a completely symbolic representation of the setting, which just lets the reader fill in all the blanks and make all the assumptions by themselves. So where in that spectrum do you want to be? Do you want to make it a little bit more realistic than symbolic? Or, you have to find that point where you think the image takes your reader where you want them to go. So in short, if you're writing for other people, if you're writing for people to enjoy your story, then what you need to think about is, what do you want them to feel? Do you want them to feel that they're in this new space that is very rich and turn your settings into a character? Or do you want your reader just to get the point of the story and fill in the blanks about setting and character on their own? Now, I don't want to get these two things mixed up. Setting and character are not the same thing. There are some authors that will have very realistic settings and very symbolic characters, because they're trying to make the point maybe that this character could be you and you are in this wonderfully rich setting. So there could be a mismatch between the level of symbolism in your characters and the level of symbolism in your settings. So you can always play around with the level of symbolism of your settings, of your characters, and see what effects you get. How do the readers feel about what you created? So yeah, it's go for it. Experiment, have fun, see what you like to create and what you get from it. And see also what the readers get from it and how do they feel about your story when you make those decisions. Okay, moving on to the second point, which is getting what you want. So now that you know what you want, now, how do you get what you want? Well, I'm gonna give you a dose of perspective, pun intended. Backgrounds in comics are one of the most time-consuming things ever, period. Every time you draw a panel, if you have a background, you need it not only to be there, which it consumes enough time as it is to just make it exist, to draw it every time, but you need to make it consistent. Like characters go in front of objects, go behind objects, and you always have to have this perception of how the space looks like, how big it is in proportion to the character, and how far the character is from all of these objects. So I don't know about the rest of you, but to me, settings is one of the most thinky ones, because if I have to draw a character, I'm fine. I'm like, oh, my character's scared, or my character's jumping. Yeah, it's jumping. But how far is it from the floor? What part of the wall is my character covering? Is it covering the window? Oh no, I have a tangent. I have a tangent with the fist and the air and I'm not going to go on the whole headache that backgrounds are for me, but I find them very, very challenging. because I want them to be consistent. I hate it when things move around in a comic, and I found myself a lot of times in a situation where, for instance, my character is going upstairs and suddenly I realize, oh, darn it, I drew the stairs on the right hand side in my first chapter, and now in chapter 5 I've drawn the stairs on the left hand side, so I have to repeat the entire scene. You know, you don't want those things to happen. So one of the key things I have to tell you about getting what you want for your background is, number one, be very clear on the fact that it takes a lot of thinking and you have to be very careful. And if you're absent-minded like I am, and you sometimes forget in which side of the hand the thumb is, then you're going to struggle. You're going to struggle like I do. So what I do, and what you can see in the images, is that I create floor plans, and in each scene I place a dot, and you might think this is crazy, but I need this. I place a dot representing where my character is at each point of the scene. This is something that I learned from cinema. Apparently, continuity is also a big problem in cinema, and I can see how that is the same as in comics, because, you know, actors in between takes, they may go for a coffee or they may go to the toilet, so they have to put marks on the floor to remember exactly where they were. And I'm sure you've seen a million videos online, continuity mistakes in films. You don't want that in your comic, so what you can see in the background here is that I am creating floor plans, and later when I am finishing my script, I will be placing dots which determine where each character is at each panel in the scene, so that I don't make mistakes that I usually make. Because that matters to me and I'm willing to take the time. But if you don't care, you know, let your objects float around. Do like George Herriman did in Crazy Cat. It's a masterpiece of comic books, but things move around and change. One panel, Crazy has a hat in his head. The second panel, he has a pencil in his head. And in fact, it becomes one of the signature of his comic, the fact that the backgrounds move around and are crazy. And it goes with the story because the story is crazy. Crazy Cat, there you go. But no, it doesn't work for every story. So if you're planning on writing a story where objects don't move around randomly and everything is not bonkers and very surreal, then if you're absent-minded like me, I would recommend you do floor plans and then you do your little dots for where each character is. And now a final quick note on reference. As you can see here, I am looking for reference. I have an idea in my head of what I want, but I still want a real object as reference. This doesn't mean that I am going to look for the exact reference that I want in the exact position, because I'm not copying, I'm not tracing, I'm just referencing. And this would be like an entire complete video for another time, so I'm gonna leave it as that. Don't go crazy trying to find the perfect reference. Find something that you can work with that will serve you to get the structural reality that you need to build something good, and move on. That's what my advice would be. And now on to the 100 days of making comics. How did my week go? Well, as you can see, this video is very short because I spent part of my week, actually the end of my week, going back to the script and doing the final edits and just finishing the story. I always do a first pass at the thumbnails and the script, and then I do all this visual development, which allows me time to think and to reflect on the story and to forget about it in a way. And then I look at the thumbs and I'm like, and I can be the editor. And that's what I've been doing. I've been getting reference for each scene and then editing. And I've come up with some interesting stuff. So next week I'll be talking a little bit about editing and what my editing process is like. And until then, I hope you're having a good week, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.